I want to go back for a moment all the way to Lent, the first Sunday of Lent. One of the things we reflected on at that time was, why do we sin? And this answer is really quite simple. There are two reasons. One is we like to do what we want to do. We want to do our own will over God's will. And the other reason is, in some way, we've lost trust in God's goodness. So, in other words, God's holding something back. God's not allowing me to have this good thing, and therefore I'm going to grasp for it, and when all reality, it's not good for me. So those are the two reasons we sin, because we like to do what we want to do, and because somehow we've lost trust in God's goodness. I think this weekend, especially as we have this reading from Genesis with our first parents, Adam and Eve, the first sin is disobedience towards God's will. And what I want to focus on is the impact of sin on our lives. And you can see it very quickly with Adam and Eve, the impact. We hide from God, we're filled with shame, and we blame one another and God for our problems. I think it's good to go back to that prodigal son image that I talked about on Easter Sunday, because you can see all of these elements with the prodigal son. Right? What happens? He leaves his house, he leaves the father. Why? Because he wants to do what he wants to do, the younger son. He thinks that his father isn't letting him do what he wants to do, so he's like, I'm done with you, I'm out. And he goes away. And after he goes away, what does he do? He has a sinful life, he does all these sinful behaviors, and he's filled with shame. And you know he's filled with shame because he says, I'm no longer worthy to be called my father's son. I'm only good enough to be a slave. So he's filled with shame. And I also think there might be some sort of blame game going on here. Like, why isn't he going back to the father? Why isn't he going home? Because in some ways, I think he blames his dad. If you'd only done this, I would never have left. If maybe the older brother wasn't the favorite, maybe I wouldn't have had to do something to find love and attention from you, right? The blaming can keep us away. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think every person in this church, including me, can think of ways in which sin has weighed us down. I think all of us can think of ways in which sin has made it hard for us to seek God. Instead, we've hidden from him, not because he can't see us, but because we think we can somehow hide from him. And there's also, I think many of us know, there's people who don't even come to church. They stay outside of the garden, outside of the church, if you will, because they want to do what they want to do. They don't realize how loved they are. So we have to make sure that we're bringing them back into God's family. I think also all of us experience that shame from our own sins, our own past behaviors or regrets that we carry. And I think sometimes we even think, if my friend or my spouse or my family member knew of this thing, they would no longer love me. And we even attribute that to God. God can't love me for these things that I've done. And then also we struggle with the blame game, don't we? We blame each other, which causes division. We blame God. God, if you had just showed up in my life, I would never have done that. If you actually cared, you would have prevented me from doing this bad thing. You know, we don't just blame each other, we blame God. I think the question for us is, how do we get out of this? What's the way to freedom and healing from the being weighed down by sin? I'm not sure we're going to like the answer. Because the answer, honestly, what Jesus says in our gospel is, those who are part of God's family follow his will. So what does that mean? Well, imagine for a moment that you're dropped into the middle of some really thick forest. And this forest is so thick that you can't even see the sky. Which is a problem because you sort of need the sun to kind of give you some sense of direction, where it's east, west, north, south. And if you can't just find that and you don't know what way you're oriented, you're going to have a hard time knowing which direction you're going. And the only way to escape this forest or to find freedom is to have a map. So you come across this person says, hey, I have a map. If you want to get out of the forest, here it is. And you say, no, I'm good. I don't like rules. I don't like guidelines. I like to do my own thing. And the person would say, well, you're going to always be lost. Nope, I like to do what I do. Well, that would be stupid. Take the map, right? If you want to be free, follow the roadmap out of the forest. And I think for us, we don't like the guidelines and the rules that God gives us, but he gives them to us so that we can be free, so that we can flourish, so that we can ultimately be happy. And that's why Jesus says in our gospel today, those who are members of God's family follow his will. So my brothers and sisters, I just encourage you to think about your own sinfulness this weekend. May you be healed and be filled with the dignity of as God's children. Because God doesn't want you to live in that shame. He wants to raise you out of it. But in order to do so, that means we must be willing to follow Jesus home. As Jesus has come into our world to bring us back to the Father, he also has shown us the way to live, which means to love God above all things and to love our neighbor as ourselves.